Hello, my name is Diane Potter. I'm Clinical Risk Advisor working in the Quality and Risk team. I'm also the network lead for Proability, and today I'd like to talk to you about my lived experience. So Thursday the 19th of September 2019 was the day that my life changed. I went to work in my usual capacity as outpatient matron, and I went home a cancer patient, never to return to my beloved department and my clinical role again. And I actually feel quite emotional just verbalising that. I was diagnosed with stage 2B, grade 3 triple negative breast cancer. And as an experienced outpatient nurse, I knew what that meant and I was petrified. The management decision was that I couldn't continue in my clinical role while I underwent treatment, and I was sent home sick, a cancer patient. I was off for a couple of weeks while I had investigations, but I decided that I wanted to return to work. It was my way of taking control, and I wanted to live as near to a normal life as possible. I wasn't permitted to work clinically, obviously, because of being potentially immunocompromised because of the chemotherapy. So I was seconded to the corporate cancer team, and I undertook project work, which I did up until my mastectomy in April 2020. Working at home in the latter weeks because of the pandemic and the first lockdown. I was then advised that I was clinically extremely vulnerable and I had to shield. So not only was I now a cancer patient, I was now a shielder. How labels and our diagnoses define us. Cancer becomes all-consuming, and I very quickly became reduced to my cancer diagnosis. People lowered their voices and tilted their heads when speaking to me, and looked at me with pity, and I couldn't stand that. I tried to encourage people to treat me as they always had, but most people find that very difficult when faced with cancer. The effects of cancer and chemo are all-encompassing, and me as a person, along with my hair and my dignity, I began to disappear. Despite everyone's concern and asking me, "How are you?" what they were really asking was about the cancer. No one really asked about me. I gave up any attempt of trying to communicate how I actually felt, how frightened I was of the diagnosis, of the treatment, and of course the elephant in the room that must not be mentioned at any cost, how scared I was that I was going to die. I was jollied along, fed platitudes of, "Oh, if anyone can beat it, you can, and you're so positive, you're going to get through it." But I felt totally invisible as a person. It was all about the cancer. There were times when I just wanted to scream, just see me, just listen to me. But instead I bottled it up, cried in the shower, slapped on my makeup and my wig and got on with it. But I slowly began to withdraw. And then of course the whole cancer thing becomes a bit boring to everybody else, and gradually the "I'll always be there for you" messages stopped. And the only ones that are really there for you are your family and your real, true friends, the ones who thankfully let you be you and let me be me throughout it. By the time I'd been shielding for 5 months and I'd been off sick for surgery and radiation during that time, it really felt to me like a true case of out of sight. I'd like to think that it might have been different were it not for the pandemic. And then I came back from sick leave, and trying to return to the workplace in my usual clinical role proved impossible. I was still considered clinically extremely vulnerable, even though the first lockdown and shielding had actually ended by then. I hadn't been at work during the pandemic. I was in my 60s and I'd had cancer. It was suggested that perhaps ill health retirement might be an option that I'd like to consider. even though I was fit and well again by then. I felt unsupported, I felt isolated, worthless, diminished as a person and as a healthcare professional, and completely defined by my cancer diagnosis. Cancer and chemo had taken my breast, my hair, my confidence, and seemingly my job. I no longer felt respected as the person that I had been at work. I became very depressed, and I actually gave up the fight that I knew I couldn't win. I continued to be seconded out of my clinical role, and I worked from home throughout the next 2 lockdowns, feeling out of the way, irrelevant, of no value, and quite frankly a nuisance, because I wanted my job back. I was eventually redeployed into a non-clinical role and returned to working on site in August 2021, a full year after I returned from sick leave. And that, even despite my despite the fact that I was so keen to return to site, when I actually did, I found it really difficult. And it took me a few months to feel comfortable being back on site and amongst people, because I'd become so insular and so lacking in confidence. I'm still trying to find me again, and I'm not emerging as the person that I once was, but I've become a different version of me, and I'm slowly beginning to regain a different sort of confidence. I'm hugely passionate about the Pro-Ability Network, and I joined that when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm so proud now to be the network lead. A diagnosis of cancer is covered by disability in the legal context of the Equality Act 2010 and protects staff against discrimination in the workplace. This is lifelong, and employees with cancer must be offered reasonable adjustments to return to and remain in work if that's what they want to do. Being able to work with and beyond cancer provides a sense of normality and independence, and it's so important to well-being to not be defined by your diagnosis, and I will stand up and support any member of our staff with cancer who wants to do that. I now have no evidence of disease. I'm cancer-free, and all the other terms that are used by clinicians to reassure me. I still live with the fear of recurrence, and I have PTSD, but I'm intent on living my life and putting what was a very traumatic experience, both personally and professionally, behind me, and moving on to live beyond cancer.